if at this time Europe was mostly de-Christianized. The power of the church was not as it used to be. It was much more secular Europe. And a lot of people argue that actually the reason the Nazi took power is precisely because Christianity wasn't strong enough in Europe. But nevertheless, the Nazis as individuals were Europe Christians. And that is not me as a Jew saying that. This is what the church leaders at Selisberg said. So they recognized, and they started to recognize this, and that really, I think, took, first of all, a lot of courage, because this is not an easy thing to say. A lot of courage, a lot of lucidity to be able to see the reality in such bold terms, and in particular, a very essential willingness to do something about that, and to say, how come we've arrived to such a situation? And the process of rethinking what is it that led to a Christian Europe to end up in the situation of the Holocaust is something that the church needs to think about and eventually to take a certain number of steps. And this is how it started, and from that point of view, it is absolutely remarkable. It is a remarkable process, and we can't just forget it. Now, in 1947, the paradox was that the Catholic Church was not in the forefront. It was present, but it wasn't in the forefront. It was more the Protestants that were in the forefront of that event. And it's only a little bit later, in particular with Nostra Aetate and the Second Vatican Council, that the Catholic Church then came and took upon itself, really, to also do that whole exercise of soul searching as we have known it, and which we realize how beneficial it has been today. So we have this evolution, if you want, that has taken place through 1947, then through Nostra Aetate, which was a theological document, which really set the church onto a new path of its relationship to Judaism, but also, obviously, its relationship with other religions. It's not limited to the relationship between the church and Judaism, but also on re-evaluating the Jewish history of Christianity, okay, which was one of the very key elements of the spirit, at least of these documents. Now, that event struck a chord in the Jewish community. It did strike a chord because it had all the elements of what we call in Judaism teshuvah, repentance. Everything was there. There was, first of all, this analysis of the problem. I need to think about what went wrong. Then there was a public recognition of what went wrong, because it was a declaration, there was something public into it, and then there was the third element, which is the practical steps to change it. So it wasn't just an act of self-reflection, it wasn't just a declaration which wasn't followed up by anything concrete. The Second Vatican Council was followed up by the willingness to set up a process so that real changes would be visible and would take place. And the one who had epistemized somehow the change is the French Jew called Jules Isaac, who was the cornerstone somehow of that work with the church, who characterized it by saying, you know, it's the shift between the teaching of contempt towards the teaching of esteem and respect. It used to be contempt, and it moved to esteem and respect, and this is really what happened. Now, those are the two first steps, but those two steps needed an additional step, which was, how do you make it into practice? It's one thing to have the declaration, it's another thing to have the willingness to bring it into the reality of the politics of the church, but how do you bring it into practice? And then, clearly, one key figure, who obviously was also a key figure in the Second Vatican Council, was the Cardinal Bea. The Cardinal Bea, who set up the idea of a center of Jewish study at the Gregorian, where the objective was to teach Judaism, the values of Judaism, so that the church could understand itself better, but also so that the church could start to relate to what Judaism is today. So we needed that step to actually move a little bit forward. But then there was another stage that came in addition to that, because the difficulty when you teach Judaism, I suppose, in a Catholic setting, such as a very academic and rigorous one as the Gregorian, is being aware not to teach about the Jews as the Jews were in a sort of a mythical image of the biblical Jews. Because there's always that tendency when you make that link of saying, you know, the church needs to understand Judaism in order to understand itself, but in doing that, you send back Judaism 2,000 years in the past. And you say, okay, so to understand the origin of Christianity, I need to understand Judaism as it was. But the problem is Judaism hasn't stopped. Judaism has moved on. And for the last 2,000 years, you have the whole Rabbinic Judaism that has developed. So I think one of the problems that they quickly came to realize at the Gregorian was that they had a difficulty by having essentially Christian teachers teaching Judaism. And the difficulty was that they were teaching the mythical image of the Jew and of what Judaism was supposed to be, without having a proper understanding of what Judaism is today. And I think from that point of view, they moved to the next stage, which was to say, we need to have Jewish teachers coming and teaching Judaism. And from there onward, the process continued to unfold. And that, I think, is a very, very significant situation, so much so that I do know that today they are often questioning themselves on Jewish subject as to should they have a non-Jewish teacher, because they're very aware of that slippery road where somehow you teach a Judaism that doesn't really exist anymore, because remember the Judaism of 2,000 years ago and the Judaism of today have very little in common. One was temple-based, the other one is not. So that is a huge, of course, change and a huge difference. So somehow it's in that process, if you want, that I came to teach at the Gregorian, and I often think as to, you know, why did they pick someone like me? I mean, I'm extremely happy in that time. I think maybe it's wiser if I don't ask the question too often. But I think the first thing that they might have looked for was to find an independent Jewish voice. A Jewish voice that wouldn't be dependent on a Jewish organization, a Jewish voice that would not pretend to represent Judaism, and a Jewish voice that would be sufficiently comfortable with Israel so as not to try to represent Israel as well in the whole game, if you want. And I know that very often in the discussion, this time not at the Gregorian, but at the Vatican as such, the discussion are on a political level. And there's a little bit of Judaism that comes in, but it's a lot of political discussion with Israel. And I think they were looking for someone who could be outside of those boxes. And because I happen to be an independent rabbi, having worked in different synagogues, having lived in different countries, but not belonging to any movement as such, I thought they might have felt there was something there that they could do with me, and that's how I in a way got in touch with them through some contacts in Belgium. The editor of the books that I published were part of the Jesuit community, and then the books moved into the Jesuit circle, and then I got invited. But I think the other thing that they wanted, apart from maybe this feeling of being independent, was they wanted a rabbi who could be at the same time rabbinic and academic. Academics they had, and they still have, and they have professors coming, as I said at the beginning. But a rabbi that can teach in an academic way, but at the same time remain truthful to the spirit of the rabbinic teaching, I think was maybe a little bit more difficult to find. And I just want to tell you what I mean by that, because otherwise it's only words. If you take the example of Talmud, I can teach about Talmud, and I can give you a lecture or a few about the structure of rabbinic literature and the difference between the Talmud of Jerusalem and the Talmud of Babylon and the different strata within the Talmud. And we can go through the theoretical exercise of the rules of hermeneutics as they are developed in the Talmud and so on and so forth. And we can do an academic lecture, and then we can also spend a lot of time looking at manuscripts and different writings of different editions of the Talmud. Lots of things which are extremely interesting. So that would be a class about Talmud. I can teach you about Jewish medieval commentators, and I can tell you about Rashi, about Nachmanides, about Ibn Ezra, about Sforno, about Risconi. I mean, we can go through all the names, and I can try to explain the structure of their commentary and at what level of commentary they're referring to and how they answer each other and so on and so forth. And I can teach that in an academic way, again, looking at manuscript texts and so on. I think the problem is that what they were looking for was someone who would find a way to incorporate the academic learning about Talmud, medieval commentators, Midrash, and so on, but who can also initiate their student as to what is the Jewish way of learning, even if that is not necessarily academic. So what I do with my students at the Greg is, yes, of course, we spend a little bit of time teaching about Talmud, because you can't do Talmud without having an idea of what it is. But what I want them to do, even if it's on a limited number of texts, because there's the barrier of the language, but even if it's on a limited number of texts, I want them to do Talmud. I don't care if they're expert in Talmud. They're not going to be expert in Talmud. It's not Yeshiva University, the Gregorian. They don't have the library for that. They have lots of other things, but that they don't have. They don't have the language skills for that. But what they can do is they can have a real taste, not just a superficial text of 2 or 3 passages that everybody knows, but to spend a whole semester studying 3 pages of Talmud, for a whole semester. And here's what we do. You know, I come and I have the Talmud text, okay, and I give them the Talmud text in a language that they understand, but not in the text that they can understand, because the whole problem, for example, with the Talmud text is that if you make it understandable as a reading exercise, then it stops being Talmud. It's reading the Talmud, but the Talmud is not made to be read. The Talmud is meant to be studied, so you have to translate it in a way that gives them the opportunity to one sit against the other and start to discuss it as you would do in the yeshiva, in a way. Okay, more or less. Okay, it's not perfect and it doesn't always work and so on and so forth, but it's to give them that taste of what it's like. And in doing that, they have an element of academic Jewish learning, but they also have an element of what is it really to learn and to study as a Jew, just for the purpose of studying. And that can work with quite a lot of the material that I go with them. And I think this is what they were doing, and I obviously got confirmation of that later on, but this is the type of approach, if you want, that I'm having with them. So that's somehow how, from the very theoretical forward thinking of 1947, you ended up being able to teach a Talmud class as if you were almost in a yeshiva with the dictionary and having them arguing with each other to wonder for a day or two what this phrase really means. Okay, and that somehow gives them an experience that they cannot get anywhere else. And I'm aware, of course, that they're not going to be great experts in Talmud or in Midrash or in medieval commentaries, but they don't need to. This is not their problem. There are plenty of people who are great experts in that. They don't need to be great experts. But they need, if you want to teach the esteem, if you want to teach respect, you need to give a taste of what it really is to study those texts and why Jews, as Jews, we have devoted so much time to study those texts in such a way. So that somehow is the first part I wanted to clarify. Now let me turn to the second element, if you want, of this short presentation, which, as John said, is something quite unique because it's the theological background, if you want, to all this. That dialogue that we have, in general terms, between the Church and Judaism, but also between me and them at the Gregorian, takes place in the context of 3 elements that are unavoidable. There's the Shoah, there's the state of Israel, and there is everything that has followed from the Second Vatican Council and everything that has changed since then. Those are the three key elements. And the paradox, really, is that these three elements, I believe, they have placed Judaism and Christianity at the same time closer than ever before, and at the same time further away than ever before. And I'd like to try to explicit and tell you why there is a paradox here. And I want to do that by reading to you a short passage from a lecture I gave with the Cardinal Casper about 2 years ago. The Greg organized an event on a book which was called Christ, Jesus, and the Jewish People Today. And the book is about Christian scholars looking at what it means to look again at the figure of Jesus in theological terms once you've accepted and taken upon yourself the fact that the roots are entirely Jewish. What does it mean for the church? That was the exercise. And there were Christian scholars doing that exercise. But in that book, which has maybe, I can't remember, 7 or 8 chapters, and each contributor maybe wrote 20 pages, at that book they've added 3 pages of Jewish reaction to the article. How does a Jew react to how a Christian thinker reacts to the visual, the image of Jesus, knowing the Jewish background and affirming that Jewish background? And this is what, in the context of that book, this is what I wrote. And I'll just read you the thing, and I'll try to explain it as I go along. I said at the time, for a more recent perspective, allow me to share my view in light of the Holocaust on that subject. Since the Shoah, it is my belief that Judaism is possibly closer than ever before to understanding better the centrality of Jesus for Christianity. At the same time, however, Judaism faces a greater difficulty than ever before in one particular aspect to its relationship to Jesus. And again, that's the paradox that I've mentioned earlier. Now, from a rabbinic perspective, we have, as Jews, we have accepted the conclusion of a rabbi of the 14th century who's called the Meiri. The Meiri was a very interesting character he was a rabbi from Provence, in the south of France. And the Meiri is the first one, because you know Judaism had a problem with Christianity because of the Trinity. And for many, many centuries, the Jewish vision of Christianity was a vision of idolatry because of the Trinity. So there's a certain number of texts in the Bible, in the Talmud, that talk about what sort of relationship you should have or you're not allowed to have with idol worshippers. And if Christianity fell into the definition of idolatry, then obviously that creates a certain number of problems. Now, that was the case until the Meiri. The Meiri wrote a commentary on the Talmud, and in one of the passage on that commentary, he talks about the religions that are defined by the way of ethics. And he says that Christianity, despite, from Jewish point of view, despite the Trinity, that as Jews we do not understand, clearly is a monotheism. Now that sounds totally obvious today, but a few centuries ago, that was a real novelty. That was a very, very strong statement to come and say something like this. When we talk about respecting the other, in particular when you don't understand the theology of the other, and to say, despite the fact that I don't understand the Trinity, one thing I know is it is a monotheism. It might not be exactly the same as Jewish monotheism and so on and so forth. You can go into the fine-tuning of what the Meiri said, but somehow that's the starting point. So I said, we have accepted, of course, the conclusion of the Meiri, and therefore the monotheistic nature of Christianity as a given. Okay, and that's a few centuries ago. Equally important, though, Jesus has ceased to be seen as a symbol of